Welcome back to the Autonomous Mind podcast.
Glad to be back. We've got a lot to cover today.
We really do. So I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine possessing a perfect, completely flawless autobiographical memory.
Right, which is wild to even think about.
Yeah, totally. Every single room you've ever entered, every route you have ever walked, the exact layout of the streets you grew up on it is all stored in your brain with absolute uncompressed 4K resolution perfection.
Just zero data loss.
Exactly, zero data loss. You can recall the exact placement of a crack in the pavement from, I don't know, a Tuesday 10 years ago. But now imagine suddenly losing your sight.
It's a massive paradox.
It is.
Yeah.
So today we are looking at Chapter 3, titled The Birth of the Firewall, from the book and series exclusively titled The Autonomous Mind by Ben Sheargold. And our whole mission today is breaking down exactly what happens when a mind with perfect visual memory goes completely blind.
And to really understand the mechanics of this, we have to anchor ourselves in a very strict historical timestamp. We are placing ourselves precisely in July 2002. Right.
Because everything Ben Sheargold experienced, and that massive cognitive shift he was basically forced into, hinges entirely on the reality of his environment during that specific month.
Yeah, that transition is key.
Exactly. We are analyzing his transition from all those chronic physical variables we covered in Chapter 2 right into the psychological framework he established in July 2002, which he calls the Core OS logic flow.
And, when I first read this part of the autonomous mind, the word tragedy was exactly where my mind went. Like a sighted person going blind is tragic enough, but someone with hyperthymesia.
Well, see, we aren't looking at this as a tragedy. We are looking at it neurologically. Ben Sheargold doesn't frame it as a tragedy at all.
No, he doesn't. But before we get to the logic flow itself, I need you to break down the actual physical brain mechanics for the listener. Because what does it actually mean to have hyperthymesia, and why is going blind with that specific condition such a unique crisis? Okay, so hyperthymesia, or highly superior autobiographical memory, is just an incredibly rare neurological condition. Mechanically, the brain's memory retention system just doesn't prune data the way a standard brain does.
It just keeps everything.
Right, everything. For most of us, if we walk to the store, our brain discards the visual data of that walk almost immediately.
Yeah, because we don't need it.
Exactly. It's non-essential for long-term survival. But Ben Sheargold's brain doesn't discard that data. The neural pathways connecting the amygdala to the hippocampus are essentially hyperactive. They are cataloging his personal experiences with a level of detail that is, frankly, almost impossible for a standard brain to replicate.
Oh, wow.
So when he lost his sight, it wasn't just a physical loss of vision. It was a catastrophic data processing crisis.
Okay, let's unpack this because I want to make sure I really understand the friction here. If he already has the entire world perfectly memorized, wouldn't losing his sight be, well, slightly easier?
You'd think so, right?
Yeah, because he already knows where everything is.
It's actually the exact opposite. That perfect memory becomes the ultimate liability.
Yeah.
Let's look at the geographical reality of his situation in July 2002.
Okay, set the scene for us.
Ben Sheargold had spent exactly 90 days pacing an incredibly narrow, physically compressed corridor.
90 days just pacing.
Yes, his entire world had shrunk to a single path, just the short distance between his front door and the local corner shop. That was the absolute limit of his physical universe.
Wait, why such a tight perimeter? Was it just fear of the unknown?
Partly, sure, but mostly it was sensory conflict. When a sighted person with standard memory goes blind, their brain begins to adapt to the new sensory reality because the old visual map just sort of fades.
Right, the brain makes room for new inputs.
Exactly. But Ben Sheargold's visual map never faded. It was permanently burned in. So when he stepped out his front door during those 90 days, his brain was frantically projecting a flawless, high-definition memory of the street directly onto his consciousness.
But his eyes aren't seeing it.
Right. His actual real-time sensory input, his optic nerve, was delivering a void.
Oh, I see. Okay. Think about it like a computer trying to run the most advanced, heavy graphics software ever made, but it's on a completely busted monitor.
That's a good way to look at it.
Or, it's like a massive city grid. The city planners, which would be his memory in this case, they have a perfect, detailed blueprint of every street, every single traffic light, every intersection.
Right.
But the actual traffic lights on the ground are all broken, and no one is radioing back to headquarters. The planners are blindly trying to direct traffic based on a map that might have changed 5 minutes ago.
Yes,
Well,
exactly.
like if someone parked a delivery truck on the sidewalk, his internal map says the sidewalk is clear, but his tactile reality says there's a huge wall of metal right in front of him.
That is exactly the friction. The conflict was constant. Every single time he hesitated on the pavement, every time he encountered a physical obstacle on that short route to the corner shop, his brain was trapped in this impossible feedback loop.
Just constantly comparing the two files.
Constantly. It was desperately trying to reconcile the unyielding visual file from his memory with the complete lack of live visual feed. From a neurological standpoint, this burns an immense amount of metabolic energy.
I can't even imagine the exhaustion.
It's staggering. The stress hormones, the cortisol, the constant state of hypervigilance, it was pushing his brain toward a total cognitive crash.
Yeah.
It was an unsustainable system failure in the making.
Man, so the system is literally overheating. He's trapped in this 90 days perimeter. His brain is fighting itself, and he is right on the verge of a total breakdown.
Yes.
Now, here is where the narrative in the autonomous mind completely subverted my expectations. Because, when society talks about disabled individuals overcoming massive physical hurdles, we default to this very specific, almost cinematic narrative.
Oh, absolutely. The whole inspiration trope.
Right. We talk about finding the courage. We talk about a tearful moment of realization where the person just decides to be brave. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, because Ben Sheargold vehemently rejects that narrative,
Yeah.
which is crucial for us to understand.
He hates that idea.
He really does. The breakthrough that occurred in July 2002 was absolutely not an emotional breakthrough. It wasn't a conscious, tearful choice to, be brave.
Hold on, though. I have to challenge that a bit. You're saying he just shut off the emotion. Human brains don't work like binary code. We aren't machines.
Well,
Like, you can't just press a button and delete fear or anxiety. How is that neurologically possible?
it's not about deleting emotion entirely. It's about rerouting the survival mechanism. Ben defines this transition as the Stoic Switch.
The Stoic Switch.
Right. Under the sheer localized pressure of an imminent cognitive crash, the brain will do whatever it takes to survive.
Mm-hmm.
For Ben, the emotional processing loop, the fear, the frustration, the anxiety over the loss of sight, it was the very thing causing the metabolic drain.
Ah, so the emotion itself was the threat to the system.
Precisely. His prefrontal cortex, which handles logic and executive function, essentially overrode the amygdala, the fear center. To prevent a total psychological collapse, his subconscious deployed what we can really only describe as a security firewall. It cut access to the programs that were draining the most power.
A subconscious firewall?
Okay.
Okay, I can grasp that. It's like an extreme survival response. If a ship is taking on water, you seal the bulkhead doors, even if it means closing off half the ship. You just have to keep the vessel afloat.
Exactly. And Ben Sheargold maps this out explicitly in the book. He states that if you were to look at the source code of his mind at that turning point, it would map identically to a very specific logic flow diagram.
Right, he catalogs it as a file, doesn't he?
He does. File 100.000009266.jpg. He refers to it as the CoreOS logic flow.
Okay, let's break this file down. What does this closed-loop formula actually look like? Because the claim he makes in the autonomous mind that worry is mathematically impossible within the system is a staggering concept.
It's brilliant. It operates on strict binary conditions. Let's look at how his brain applied this exact code to the two massive variables that were basically paralyzing him during that July 2002 lockdown.
Okay, let's do it.
The first massive variable, variable A, was the physical reality of his optic nerve atrophy, specifically caused by Wolfram syndrome.
Wait, before we run this logic flow, we haven't defined Wolfram syndrome for the listener. What exactly is happening mechanically to his optic nerves here?
Right, good point.
Yeah.
Wolfram syndrome is an incredibly rare genetic disorder. Mechanically, it causes a dysfunction in the endoplasmic reticulum of the cells.
Okay, so on a cellular level, what does that mean?
In simple terms, it causes the cells in certain parts of the body to accumulate proteins improperly, and then they die off. In Ben's case, this cellular death targeted his optic nerves.
Jesus.
Yeah. The physical cables connecting his eyes to his brain were literally withering away. It is irreversible and progressive.
Okay, that is just a bleak physical reality. So how does the CoreOS logic flow process that kind of diagnosis?
The logic flow initiates. It asks the first question. Do I have a problem?
Okay.
The conscious mind answers, yes. My optic nerves are dying. It moves to the next node in the flow diagram. Can I do something about it? Can the genetic parameters of Wolfram syndrome be re-engineered or cured right here on the pavement?
And the medical reality answers, obviously no.
Right. No. So the logic flow arrives at a definitive conclusion. then why worry?
Wow. Just then why worry?
Exactly. If the variable cannot be altered, dedicating processing power to being upset about it is a fatal drain on the system's resources. So power to the emotional processing loop was cut cleanly.
Just completely severed.
That entire variable, the unchangeable reality of his genetic optic nerve atrophy, was discarded as a non-essential resource drain. It reduced the processing load dedicated to that issue to exactly zero.
It just bypassed it entirely. That is intense. But okay, let's look at variable B, which was his mobility and independence. This was the immediate practical issue keeping him confined to that 90 days perimeter, right, between his house and the corner shop.
Correct. The logic flow initiates again. Do I have a problem? Yes. I am trapped in a tiny geographic perimeter. Next question. Can I do something about it?
And here, the system finds a different answer, right?
Yes.
He has the physical capability to move. He has his primary hardware, which is the white cane.
Yes, and he has what he refers to as his 141 IQ engine.
Right, this highly analytical, hyper-intelligent processing capability that he can use to recalibrate his understanding of the terrain via spatial vectors.
Exactly, and because the answer to can I do something about it is yes, the logic flow diagram arrives at the exact same conclusion as before.
Then why worry?
Then why worry? If there's an actionable solution, worrying about the problem is a redundant waste of time.
It's just cognitive static?
Right. The logic dictated immediate execution. Because there was an action to take, the system immediately allocated 100% of its processing cores to action. Zero power went to anxiety. Maximum power went to solving the navigation problem.
Okay, so he's neutralized the biological reality of his blindness by accepting he can't change it, and he's completely eliminated the friction of fear from his mobility problem.
Yes, it's a completely clean system now.
But that still leaves a massive geographic hurdle. He is physically stuck in a narrow perimeter. How does this new logic flow process the actual physical environment?
Well, to interface with the external world, he needed a new framework. Right around the time this internal logic shift occurs, Ben takes a very formal external step. He officially applies for a guide dog.
Okay.
He decides he needs a biological mobility asset to navigate the physical world safely.
And as part of that bureaucratic process, a mobility assessor arrives at his house to run a comprehensive system audit on his current environmental navigation, right?
Yes, and we have to remember, the assessor's job is not just to hand out guide dogs like candy. A guide dog is a complex, highly trained animal. The master needs to be able to direct the dog, not rely on the dog to decide where to go.
So they have to test his baseline first.
Exactly. The assessor deeply pumps his Ben's movements. And at this exact moment, Ben was still physically trapped in the early friction of that 90 days perimeter. His physical output had not yet caught up to his internal software upgrade.
So the assessor watches him navigate to the corner shop, sees the extreme caution he's taking, and what is the conclusion of the audit? What's the log say?
The assessor's log is very clear. Ben's operational output was severely throttled. He concluded that Ben lacked the necessary foundational confidence and baseline independence in the open environment.
So no dog.
No dog. The official mandate handed down was standard bureaucratic logic. The prescription was basically, step back, get out into the world on your own first. Establish a high-functioning baseline of manual orientation using the primary hardware available, the white cane.
So learn the cane first.
Right. Master the cane, master your independent functionality, and then we can talk about dog.
So what does this all mean for a mind running on pure, overclocked binary logic? Because I can imagine a standard human reaction to that. You finally reach out for help, you ask for a tool that you desperately need, and the bureaucracy says, no, you aren't good enough at being blind yet.
Yeah, the natural response would be anger or deep frustration.
Exactly. But how does Ben process it?
He doesn't process it as a rejection at all.
Yeah.
He processes it as new data parameters. The internal system has already made worry mathematically impossible, remember?
Right, the firewall.
So there is no anger. Ben Sheargold's brain simply accepted the external mandate. But it didn't just learn to walk with a cane, which is what the assessor expected.
What did it do?
His brain processed the instruction, logged the parameters, and completely re-engineered his entire sensory intake matrix to fulfill the mandate.
Okay, let's really dig into the mechanics of that re-engineering, because this is where the autonomous mind stops reading like a psychology textbook and starts reading like a manual for human echolocation.
It really does.
Stripped of his video feed and mandated to use the white cane, Ben took all of that processing power we talked about and funneled it into a massive audio-spatial upgrade.
We need to talk about the physics of sound and neuroplasticity here. When the visual cortex stops receiving input from the optic nerves, the brain doesn't just leave that massive processing real estate empty.
It repurposes it.
Completely. The auditory cortex begins to literally colonize the visual cortex. The brain rewires itself to process sound with the exact same spatial intensity that it used to process light.
That is genuinely amazing, and it requires us as listeners to realize that the atmosphere around us is constantly saturated with latent ambient data.
It's everywhere.
We just don't think about it because our eyes do
Right.
all the heavy lifting. But the air is literally filled with sound waves, ambient white noise from traffic, wind, distant conversations, just constantly bouncing off the physical geometry of our environment.
All right, think about how sound waves travel. They are physical pressure waves moving through the air through compression and rarefaction. When those waves hit a physical object, they behave differently depending on the material's density, texture, and shape.
So how did Ben use that?
Ben Sheargold's freed-up visual processing center allowed his ears to become high-performance sonar arrays. He learned to isolate and track the microscopic differences in how ambient white noise reflected off specific structures. He was categorizing material density entirely through frequency response.
We have to spend some significant time detailing exactly what this real-time 3D mapping looked like in practice because the specific acoustic profiles he learned to isolate are mind-blowing.
Oh, absolutely. Let's go through the examples.
Let's take a standard suburban wooden fence line. For you or me, that's just a visual boundary, right? We just look at it. How did his brain map it acoustically?
So as Ben walks past a wooden fence, ambient sound waves are constantly hitting the timber panels. Wood is a relatively hard, flat surface, but it's not perfectly dense. When sound hits it, the timber absorbs some of the lower frequencies, but it reflects the higher frequencies cleanly. As he walked, his brain categorized that specific, higher-pitched acoustic reflection, that subtle slicing sound of white noise bouncing off wood as a wooden boundary.
Right. And then imagine he's walking down that same pavement, and suddenly the property line transitions. The wooden fence ends, and it becomes a solid concrete retaining wall or a heavy brick fence.
Right, a totally different material.
Visually, the texture changes, but acoustically, what is the physics of that transition for him?
The change in the audio timbre is instantaneous. The acoustic absorption coefficient of heavy concrete or brick is entirely different from thin wood. Concrete is incredibly dense, it doesn't vibrate.
So what happens to the sound?
When ambient sound hits a brick wall, it doesn't reflect the high-pitched ping. The wall physically absorbs the sound energy, creating a sudden, heavily absorbed frequency block. The ambient noise level drops.
It just goes dead.
Yes, it registers in his processing center as a dense, low-frequency void. His brain immediately mapped that transition in real time.
It's like he could feel the mass of the wall through his auditory cortex. That is wild. And it wasn't just solid, man-made structures either. Even organic matter has its own specific acoustic layout.
Yes, very distinct.
Because the autonomous mind details how he could cleanly differentiate exactly when he was passing a roadside hedgerow.
Right, because organic matter interacts with sound waves through scattering and diffraction. A hedgerow isn't a flat surface, right? It's thousands of individual leaves and branches at varying angles.
So the sound just scatters.
Exactly. When ambient white noise hits a hedge, it doesn't bounce straight back, and it isn't completely absorbed. It scatters in a million different directions. It creates a unique, highly textured, diffused audio return file. It literally sounds soft to an attuned ear.
If I can try to put this into an analogy for you, think about a submarine using passive sonar to map an underwater trench.
That's a great comparison.
The submarine isn't actively sending out a loud ping to see what's out there that would be active sonar. Instead, it's just quietly listening to how the existing ocean noise, the currents, distant ships interacts with the underwater mountains.
Passively mapping the geometry?
Right. Or honestly, it's like an organic LiDAR system. Instead of lasers bouncing back to create a topographical map, his brain is using the constant echo of the atmosphere to paint a real-time 3D architectural blueprint of his surroundings entirely through audio acoustics.
That is a phenomenal way to frame it. He is generating a constant, updating, three-dimensional model of the world inside his mind using only ambient acoustics.
And it all feeds back into his hyperthymesia.
Exactly. Remember the cognitive load we discussed earlier, the uncompressed memory. Now, instead of fighting his memory, his brain is overlaying this new acoustic data perfectly onto his flawless spatial map. Furthermore, this is all happening while he is simultaneously managing the ground-level physical changes using the white cane.
Right, so the cane is acting as a tactile extension of his nervous system, feeling for curbs, cracks, and immediate trip hazards down below, while the audio processor is reading the structural geometry of the fences and walls up above.
It is a dual input matrix.
And the ultimate test of this massive system upgrade, this unyielding logic flow diagram, occurs exactly 30 days after that initial assessment. This brings us to the 1-month audit.
Yes, the live navigation trial.
So a month passes. The mobility assessor returns to Ben's coordinates to verify his progress. They need to see if he has established enough of a baseline to finally be granted a biological mobility asset. What is the assessor expecting to see when they walk out the door?
Well, the assessor is operating on standard medical and psychological metrics. When you evaluate human beings going through a traumatic physical change, there are established degradation and recovery curves.
They have a baseline expectation.
Right. Based on standard human degradation curves, they expected only a minor incremental improvement, a slightly faster walking pace, a little less hesitation at the street corners, maybe a tentative mastery of the cane.
I didn't realize until reading this just how low the bar is for expected progress in these scenarios. But then they go out onto the public pavement for the live navigation trial, and what actually happens?
The assessor walked into a system that had completely overclocked its native parameters.
Yeah.
The reality of that live trial shattered every standard metric the bureaucracy had. Ben Sheargold stepped out onto the pavement and did not hesitate.
Think about what is happening in his brain at that exact second. He steps out, and the systems engage flawlessly. The cane is rapidly handling the ground-level tactile input. The auditory cortex is reading the environment at light speed,
Taking it all in.
pulling in the high-pitched slices off the wood, the dense absorption of the concrete, the diffuse scattering of the leaves, and all of that acoustic data is generating real-time vector inputs that feed directly into his spatial memory map.
The synchronization was absolute. He moved down the street with unyielding velocity. He was processing cross streets, identifying obstacles, and navigating terrain changes instantly. He wasn't just walking. He was executing a highly optimized navigation script.
And the assessor is just walking behind him, trying to observe this, and is completely stunned. They finish the trial, they get back, and the assessor delivers a verdict that is so fascinating. The assessor looks at him and says, "Ben, you've completely shot yourself in the foot here."
Which is such an ironic conclusion, given what Ben had actually accomplished. We really need to look closely at why the bureaucracy viewed this as a failure, but Ben's internal system viewed it as a massive triumph.
Exactly, because on paper, Ben did everything they asked. The mandate was establish a high-functioning baseline of manual orientation. He did that perfectly. Why on earth did the assessor say he shot himself in the foot?
Because of the massive metric variance. Ben Sheargold hadn't just met the baseline. He had out-navigated the very biological asset they were supposed to provide him.
He beat the dog.
He beat the dog. You have to understand how a guide dog functions. The bureaucracy system is designed to pair a hesitant, spatially unaware human with a highly confident animal. The dog stops at the curb, the human feels the stop through the harness, and they navigate together.
Ah, I see. It's a fundamental conflict of processing speeds.
Yes.
If they strapped a guide dog's harness into Ben's hand, the dog would be trying to communicate spatial inputs, right? Stopping for a trash can, turning a corner. But Ben's internal acoustic operating system was processing the environment so fast that he would already know the trash can was there before the dog stopped.
Exactly. He would likely override whatever physical inputs the dog was trying to communicate through the harness.
The dog would just be in the way.
The dog would become a bottleneck. The biological asset operates at a certain deliberate speed. But Ben's binary logic framework, his firewall against worry, and his acoustic mapping had executed the optimization script so ruthlessly that his internal system was simply faster than the dog. 30 days prior, he set out to qualify for a mobility asset. 30 days later, he had rendered the asset entirely obsolete.
The magnitude of that is, honestly, it's hard to wrap my head around. He reached a state of total system autonomy. He realized that he could get around the physical environment faster, cleaner, and with far greater structural certainty than the vast majority of visually able individuals.
It's true.
He didn't need a biological guide to parse the world for him. His internal architecture had become completely self-sustaining.
It is the ultimate manifestation of the core OS logic flow. He took a situation that threatened total cognitive collapse, applied a ruthless binary firewall to eliminate the redundant process of worry, and reallocated all of his system's power to optimizing a newly colonized sensory matrix.
As we synthesize everything we've unpacked today, it is incredible to look at the profound journey documented in the autonomous mind. We started with a mind pushed to the absolute brink, physically confined to a 90 days perimeter, facing an imminent cognitive crash because of the intense friction between its perfect memory and its new physical reality.
And we watched how the crushing pressure of that confinement forced an evolutionary leap. The Stoic Switch didn't just save him from a psychological breakdown, it fundamentally restructured his biology and how he interacted with the physical universe.
Which brings me to a final provocative thought I want to leave with you. We've spent this entire deep dive breaking down how Ben Sheargold completely re-engineered his sensory capabilities. He learned to read the acoustic reflections of the physical world and outpace able-bodied individuals, and he did it all by ruthlessly cutting power to the redundant emotional loop of worry.
He deployed a firewall that eliminated cognitive static.
Exactly. So I want you to think about your own daily life. How much of your own mental processing power is currently being drained by variables you absolutely cannot control? What could you achieve? What kind of systems could you optimize if your mind deployed a strict binary firewall against that cognitive static?
It's a question that demands we look at our own unoptimized systems.
It really does. Please subscribe and like.